You're listening to another episode of From the Dust with Sarah Decker, a place to explore spiritual experiences and topics. And no, we are never alone. Good morning, Janet. Thank you so much for being here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is really exciting. These are great subjects to talk about, and I'm finding too that I've done probably 10 or 12 of these interviews now on YouTube and other places, and people are super curious about this topic. So I'm excited to get after it.
Yeah, and just for those who are watching, you have your own website and you post videos every week and you do classes and stuff. And and you're doing some great things in the world too. So I really that have kind of, I don't know, would you say that your near-death experience kind of like began that role of where you're at now in life, or
Yeah, it absolutely.
your
Well,
trajectory?
I don't know if it began it, but it definitely was a catalyst for greater levels of expansion and spiritual awareness and learning. It was
Yeah.
definitely a catalyst, like a hinge point. I look
Yeah.
at my life before having and I have had a series of near-death experiences. So I've had several little minis. Like my experiences are not what you hear on YouTube that are grandiose, where they go to heaven and talk to angels and talk to God and talk to their dead loved ones. Although I have had experiences like that since my cracking open. I call it a cracking open because I do feel that my experience with stepping out of the body or stepping into the threshold between life and death, I really do think that was a cracking open for me. But yeah, I look at my life before and I look at my life after, and it really was the beginning of a tremendous expansion.
Yeah, and I was thinking that's what I was thinking, is like it could have, I imagine it could be a really great pivot place. And
Yeah.
let's talk about your life kind of before, and then just maybe start getting into your story.
Well, I was a typical little kid. I grew up on a farm up in Canada, and I was really shy, really quiet. I actually think I had an NDE when I was a baby because I fell down an entire flight of stairs into the basement in a walker, those little roll around walkers, and I'm sure I had a fractured skull. I had two black eyes, bloody nose. It was a terrible accident. I can't believe that I didn't die from that. But I do wonder sometimes if I had an NDE at that time. I don't really have memory of it, but just hearing my mother talking about it. So there was that. But she said after that happened, I stopped walking and I stopped talking and I shut down and I went really quiet. And so I went inside of myself and went into that stillness, but I had a really hard time after that connecting to the rest of the world. And so it put me on a trajectory of being awkwardly and backwardly shy. I couldn't look people in the eye. It was very uncomfortable for me, but I also, and you probably noticed this in your own kids, because I noticed it and witnessed it in some of my children. I was very, very sensitive. I was spiritually sensitive. I could feel people's feelings. I could feel the vibes of the room. I could feel the vibes of the world. And so as a little kid, I was very sensitive. When I became a teenager, I developed some serious health challenges. It started with chronic fatigue. It started with Epstein-Barr, actually. Then it went into chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and over time, people said that I had Lyme's disease, and there were other things too. I had some allergies and stuff, but because of that, I went through about 25 years of struggling with my health. And I think that was a catalyst too. I had 6 children. I was a very busy mother. I ran my own business and I was busy in my church assignments and stuff. And And so what ultimately ended up happening was after my sixth baby, you know how life gets when you have all these little children and all these weighty responsibilities, and life is just in chronic stress coping mode. And that was where I was when I had my NDEs. And my adrenals were shot. I owned a cleaning company, my own cleaning company. So I had all the stress and responsibility of that. I had just had my sixth baby. I was in very, very high responsibility callings in assignments in my church. So, and I was homeschooling my kids on top of all of that. So there was a high amount of stress going on in my life, and on top of being sick already and being an empath. And I think it was just, my body was just like, I'm done. And I started having checkout experiences where I feel like maybe that was my adrenals shutting down, but I would lay in bed sometimes and feel myself being pulled out of my body, being pulled away from my body, and I'd see my body from up above, but not really realizing what was happening or what was taking place. And so I would have these ebb and flow experiences where I'd come out, but then go back in, and then come out and go back in. I think that was really the opening for me, the beginning stages of kind of opening me up a little bit more. I think just the stress of drama and trauma is what shuts us down. Because I think all children come into this world very, very spiritually open, very spiritually sensitive. They have a good, healthy sense of who they are. Most of them do. And then we go through drama and trauma, and that has a tendency to put these filters on our spiritual senses and our ability to discern who we actually are versus the programming that's put upon us. So I would say it was in my 40s when I started having those, I would call it adrenal failure experiences where I'd pop out of the body a little bit. And then I had a
Can I
doozy.
ask like what that really was like for you? Like, what do you mean when you say pop out of the body?
Like I literally felt like I was being sucked out of my body. Like it felt like somebody had a vacuum on my core, and that all my energy, all of my, like I had such severe fatigue. Sometimes I just couldn't hardly get out of bed. I parented my children from the floor most days because I was just so drained and so fatigued. So it was pretty severe. And the doctors would scratch their heads. They didn't know what to do with me. It was like this big mystery. And they wanted to put me on steroids and other things, but I didn't feel to do that. And so I just kept moving on. So yeah, it was mostly like I was being drained of all of my energy. But sometimes I would lay there you know how when you're waking up from sleep and you're kind of in a lucid state? I would get stuck in that lucid state and I couldn't wake up. But I wasn't asleep, but I also couldn't move my body. And some people would call that, spiritual paralysis or whatever, but those kinds of things would happen a lot. I had a lot of spiritual attack, a lot of psychic attack at that time. So I feel like I was maybe kind of just hovering in this spiritual threshold between the physical dimension and the spiritual dimension. And there's a lot of shady characters that hang out in there, in that space. But the kicker for me, the doozy, was I was actually working out with a group of women. I thought, I need to get in shape. Of all things, I didn't know that my adrenals were completely shot at that time. I had no business exercising, but I was exercising in a park. I had been doing it for about a month. And but this one particular day that I went, I wasn't feeling good. I was tired and having a hard time getting into the workout. We were all at this park with a bunch of women from my church, and we were all just working out together. And I was sort of in the back because I was slow and I wasn't feeling it. And I was just having a hard time getting into it. And all of a sudden, I got really lightheaded and dizzy. And you know how just before you're ready to faint, everything starts getting speckly and white. And I was like, I'm going to pass out. So I looked behind me and there was this little park bench. And so I just went over to that bench and sat down on it. And it wasn't long before I was out. Like I could feel my extremity. I could feel all the energy from my extremities kind of getting drained out of me, and my arms went hard as a rock and stiff. My legs went stiff. So I could feel vitality leaving the extremities and going to just, keep support my body, my vitals. Um, and then my vision went. So I lost vision, but I was still kind of conscious a little bit, which is weird because when you pass out, you lose consciousness. I was still fully conscious. Even though everything was dark, I was still very much aware. I could hear everything that was going on around me. And then my breathing started to go, and I was like, oh crap, I'm going to die. I'm dying. And, I had been sick for 25 years prior to that. So I had already had in my mind that I wasn't going to live very long because my health was so poor. And so I just thought, oh, well, this must be it. This is how I'm going to go. And I was very open to that. In many ways, I kind of wanted it because I wasn't living a very high quality life at that point. Anyways, I was so, didn't have a lot of vitality. So I surrendered to the process, and I remember feeling a little bit of panic and anxiety because I couldn't breathe. I couldn't catch my breath and I couldn't get air into my lungs because my body would not do what I was asking it to do. And so I surrendered to that too. And in the moment that I surrendered, everything went from panic to peace, like almost instantly. And before I knew it, I wasn't worried about breathing or anything. I wasn't worried about anything, but I could see that there was this little bit of chaos kind of gathering around me. Women were starting to notice, hey, she's blue. Something's not right. And so I could hear women on their phones calling 911. I noticed that were people coming over trying to revive this lifeless body. And at that point, I was already witnessing it from an external vantage point. So I think I had already sort of popped out of the body a little bit because I was witnessing it. And though it was the weirdest thing to look down on my physical body that was just inanimate, because other than looking in a mirror, you really don't ever have a chance to witness yourself from an external vantage point like that because we're always in here. So not being in here and looking at the physical body from an external perspective was a little bit weird. And but there were a couple of things that I noticed when I had that. Was the first thing that I noticed was I remember thinking, why is everybody so stressed out? I could not comprehend. And I could hear the ambulance. They did call an ambulance. There were people trying to revive me. They were trying to do CPR. There was one woman that was slapping my face going, come on, Janet, you got to breathe. And I remember thinking, I don't want to. Like, this is way better. Because I was in this heightened state of euphoria for the first time in probably the majority of my life. I felt limitless. There was no more heaviness of the body. I could go anywhere. I could do anything. I had vitality for the first time. And I wouldn't even call it energy. It was just like this limitless feeling that nothing was weighing me down anymore. So it was really nice. It was a nice reprieve to be away from the body for just a little bit. But I remember thinking, why are they stressed out like that? Like, I'm still here. I'm right here. Don't they realize that everything's fine? In fact, if anything, it's better. It's better now. So that's about as far as I went. So I did not travel through the cosmos. I did not go to heaven and talk to people. But in that little brief period of time where I had popped out of the body, I always tell people, like, I feel like I stepped into the oneness, if that makes any sense at all. I just had this conscious awareness that through my consciousness, I could witness and experience every blade of grass. Like my consciousness could go into all things. My consciousness was in every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every mountaintop, every ocean floor, every star in the sky, everything. Like my conscious self became the container of the universe, if that makes sense. So I was perceiving through all of it. And that was a profound experience. It was like an awakening or an epiphany that everything that I'm witnessing in my external world, I am that. So when I look at you, Sarah, I can literally say from that oneness perspective, I am you. You are me. We are one in and around and through that divine infinite intelligence that flows through us. And we have access to being one with all that is through that divine intelligence, that substance that flows through us, all of us. But yet at the same time, I knew that I was a unique divine expression of the light, that I was more than just all the light and all the oneness. I was a unique expression of it. My being was an expression of it. So those were just kind of some of the things, some of the takeaways that I had early on in the moment. But after having that, then I actually went to the hospital. I had to go through a series of tests. They never could figure out why that happened to me. They wanted to put me on corticosteroids to support my adrenal glands and all of that. But I went home and I recovered, and it took me a long, long time to come back fully into my body and feel good again. But I kept telling people it was the most amazing experience. I felt like somebody had put a different lens in front of me, like different glasses, and I was witnessing now the world from a totally different vantage point. It really was an epiphany. It was an awakening for me. So I mean, that was it. It was a brief little come out of the body, step into the oneness. Now you're different. It was just like that.
That's so interesting. I'm just imagining being so afraid for you and being like, how are you doing, for you to say it was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. That
Yeah. Well,
had to have been,
clearly, I was not having the same experience as those women were
yes.
having, and they were in a state of fear, and I did feel bad for them.
Yeah. I I not explain this. It's always hard for me to explain, and I want to understand if this is kind of what you're saying, because it seems like it may be. Um, so had this, I asked this question one time when I was praying about this idea of being one, but also our individuality. Like, how does that work? I don't know if I understand. And what I was shown was that all of our intelligence, all of our experience, it becomes part of like if we want to call it an ocean of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all gathered into one.
Yeah.
So, and it's all accessible by all, but that we are still individuals within that ocean.
Right. You don't lose your individuality, or nor do you lose your identity as a being. But like you said, the expansion of the light that is within you, that you are expressing, which the light is everywhere. It's in and around and through all things. It's divine, infinite intelligence. And that is like the big swimming pool or the big ocean. But our consciousness is the container of it. So you have that, I have that, we all have access to that. And people who are highly sensitive or empathic are very tuned in and very dialed in. It's why you can feel the vibes of other people, and it's why you can perceive thoughts from other people, is because we're all in the same ocean, in the same swimming pool, of intelligence.
Sorry, I don't know if I think it was probably my internet. I lost you for a second, so I missed part of your sentence. I want to hear it.
I don't even know what I said. Well, okay, let's go back. I will say this. We talked about, sometimes that can feel scary to try to comprehend or try to understand the oneness, right? The being all things, or being the expression of God. You're just another expression of God. People don't want to go there because they don't want to lose their identity. They don't want to lose the specialness of who you actually are. And I don't think we have to lose that. I think that the divine infinite intelligence that is in and around and through all things, we all have access to that. So I see it as light. And so the light is you, the light is me, the light is in you, it's also in me. It's like asking, where does the air in the living room end and the air in the kitchen begin? It doesn't. It's just air. It's just everywhere. It's in and around and through all things, right? So that is the light. That's divine infinite intelligence. Some people call that God. I don't know that I would call that God. I would call it intelligence. And we all have access to it because it flows in and around and through you as a physical and spiritual being. But that's not necessarily God, and it's not necessarily you. You are a unique reflection and expression of that light. That's your being. The way that you shine, nobody else can do that the way that you do. So, yes, we do get to maintain a level of our own infinite, eternal identity. And what you bring into the universe and into the world, nobody else can bring. Does that help explain?
I think it's lovely. I hope it does help. And I I was just thinking about how I think some of the pushback on that is like, oh, I don't want to be compared to the plants or the animals, like we're unique because we're God's children. And so I was just thinking about that in the sense of, for me, I found peace in the understanding that because God created all of these things, it has part of that light. And it's like his signature on it all. And or his, as people, we all have the DNA of our parents, but we're still individuals.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about that too. We as people, we may still have that light from our Father, and we're a part of him. We're connected to him because we are a part of him.
Yeah.
But we are still our individual person. And I have found that for me, the way that God designed our earth existence here on those kind of levels, the creationary levels, is a way that he has tried to help us see him and to see the way that we are connected. I went to a program called Landmark years ago, and it was like a weekend program. You went for 3 days. You were there all day, and they were trying to get us to understand a concept all weekend. And they wouldn't spell it out for us. They kept trying to get us to get it. And by the end of the weekend, the concept was that our disconnect from one another was an illusion, that we are all connected. And so I've just carried that with me for years. And I think I understood it that weekend, but throughout life, we kind of pull away from it into some of those moments of understanding and get back into our routines of our worldly understandings, our the way culture works or whatever. And
the separation.
And so I'm just thinking that, not everyone who has a near-death experience has that kind of experience. I've read a lot of them now, and sometimes people just feel like they can see everything in all the way around their body. Like with every cell of their body, they almost have eyes. They can just see and feel everything. But you didn't just have that. It's like this connection to everything as well.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you what I, as far as I understand it, we have these experiences to help kind of pivot us towards our calling or
Yeah.
the work we're meant to do in life. So
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you why, or why you feel you had that specific experience, and how has it helped you moving forward from that experience?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to share with you before you asked the question. So that's perfect. We're on the same wavelength. I do feel like when we have any kind of trauma or drama, it doesn't even have to be an NDE. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I wish I could have a near-death experience so I could have my consciousness expanded or my spirituality awakened." And you don't need that. We all have different ways of waking up to who we actually are. And I do believe that we will have trauma, drama, suffering, illness, whatever it is, loss of a loved one. It doesn't really matter what it is, but something to jolt us so that it can act as a catalyst for the waking up of ourselves out of our slumber and coming back into the truth of who we really are as divine beings, because we are divine beings, but we get sleepy and we forget when we're here in this world because of what you talked about, separation, because we feel separate from God, we feel separate from each other. So one of the things that happened when I popped away from the body and I was looking at my own physical body thinking, wait a minute, I thought that inanimate bag of dirt and water, I thought that was me. And then I realized, you know what? If that isn't me and I'm still conscious and I'm still aware and I'm still here having this experience, who am I then? What am I? And as I asked that question, I think that was also a catalyst for greater levels of spiritual awakening to ask the question, who am I then? Um, and I think that's a question that every human being deserves to have the answer to. You deserve to know how awesome you are. My mother died in 2017, and she came to me in a vision and stood at the foot of my bed. This was after having these NDEs. And she stood at the foot of my bed and she was just pointing at herself. And she did not look like her physical body at all. And the only reason that I knew it was her was because I could see it in her eyes and I could feel the presence of her essence. I could feel the feeling of her. And I was just like, it was the most beautiful being I've ever laid eyes on. She was very tall and very luminous and radiant and just beautiful. Just there's no words. I can't describe, but it was the most beautiful being I've ever laid eyes on. And I asked if she had ever seen that part of herself when she lived here, and the answer was no. And I thought to myself, that is a tragedy. That is tragic that a human being can go 80 years on this planet and never really know who they actually are. That's sad. And so, what that did at that point was it woke me up to what I feel like my mission is now at this point is the work that I do is to help people come to a greater level of awareness of who they really are on a spirit level. Because isn't it, I think it was Joseph Smith who made the comment or the quote that men who do not comprehend the nature of God will never comprehend it themselves. They will never understand themselves, or vice versa. I think it might have been flipped around, but it goes both ways. If you want to know the nature of God, come to know yourself because you are the offspring, the literal offspring of God. And if you want to come to know yourself, then come to know God. It goes both ways. So, I would love to share, like there's about 10 truths that I feel like I opened my awareness to after stepping out of the body and connecting with my higher self in that moment. Can I share those?
Please, please. I'm excited to hear them.
Well, the first one is just that, like your true self, your higher self, which is the God self, is waiting for you to come to know yourself 100% again. It's That's the return home. Often in religion, we talk about, I want to live a good life. I want to do everything right in this world. I want to qualify and make my covenants so that I can return to live with Father in heaven again. That returning home is actually a return to the true authenticity of who you actually are as a divine being, as an offspring of God. That's coming home. It's coming home to self, but when you come home to self, you also come home to God. You come to know who God is. So that was the first thing that I felt like was a learning for me, and a catalyst for that learning. The second thing is that if you want to heal the pains of the past, you have to learn how to touch the divine, how to step away from, maybe not even step away from the physical here, but step through it and learn how to access higher levels of spirituality, higher levels of, people call it consciousness, but really it's just your spiritual senses. And that's a return to self, and that's a return to God. If you want to heal the pains of the past, that's what you got to do. And so that's the work that I do now. I feel like that's a calling that I've been given, or an opportunity for me to serve others in that way, is to help them learn how to tap into that aspect of themselves without having to have an NDE. The third thing that I feel like I learned was that touching the divine, this is the key to expanded consciousness, higher levels of spiritual awareness. And that's born out of self-love. We step into those, we step into the oneness, we step into the awareness, we step into the high consciousness through high levels of self-love, because that, again, it's the same thing. That's God's love also for you. So if you want to feel God's love, learn to tap into self-love. You can't, to the degree that you have self-love is to the degree that you're going to feel God's love for you. It's also to the same degree that you'll be able to spill that out onto others in your life. So that was principle number 3. Principle number 4 was had to do with surrendering to what is, learning to just surrender. And I feel like I did that when when my body was shutting down. Rather than fight and resist, I just went, well, this is my reality right now. I'm going to surrender in and lean in. And I think that because I leaned in and just surrendered and allowed it to unfold, it was what it was for me. And it ended up being a profoundly spiritual experience to this day, probably one of the most spiritual experiences I've had, because I feel like I stepped more into myself than I ever had before. So surrender to what is. Stop trying to brute force and control the world around you, or the way that life plays out around you. Which kind of leads into principle number 5, which is learn how to just let life unfold for you. Just allow it to unfold. You don't have to push it. You don't have to stress it. You don't have to. We're conditioned in this world to think that we have to brute force our way through this world, through this life, to become something. Well, guess what? You already are that something. You can't become it even if you tried, because you're already there. All the things that you think that you're striving forward towards, you already are all of that. All the love that you think you need, you already are all of that. So allow life to just unfold. Allow yourself to unfold. Allow your children to unfold without putting them into a container or a box that says you have to be this way. No, let them unfold. 6, I had to learn this for me. Stop trying to assign meaning to every little thing and just let it be. And let yourself just be. It's okay to just be. That's been one of the most profound learnings I feel like that I've gained from all of this, is just the beingness. Step into your beingness and just be in it for a while and see what it actually feels like to be you. Who's looking through the eye holes of your eyeballs Who's listening with your ears? Who's in that body animating it? We often don't really stop to think about who's the divine being that's in here. You look in the mirror, that's not you. That's not the sum total of you. It is definitely material that comes with you because we have to be able to interface with this dimension that we're in, but it's not the sum total of you. It's not coming with you. When you lay this body down and you die, your body doesn't come with you. So I would love for people out there who are going to listen to this to start becoming more attuned to the part of you that is never ending, the part of you that is eternal and infinite, the part of you that is not temporary, the part of you that animates the physical body that you think is you, because it's not actually the sum total of you. Number 7, be grateful for what comes and how it unfolds. Just be in a place of gratitude for what comes, because even in the suffering, you never know what amazing, beautiful, blissful, awesome lessons are there for you. I complained a lot. I was sick for 25 years, and I mean really sick, to the point where it was really hard for me to function in life. It was hard for me to enjoy my life. I didn't have a lot of joy in my life because I was so sick and so focused on the distraction of that. I look back on that time in my life now, and I'm so grateful that I went through that, because it taught me a lot of things that I could have never learned any other way. Couldn't have learned any of that stuff by reading about it. I could have never learned to be connected to the 100% of my actual self by reading about myself. I could have never learned how to connect to God just by reading about God, if that makes sense. It's all experiential. And so our suffering and our lessons are here to give us experience that will tap us into ourselves and into God. Principle number 8 is learn to live in bliss. And you can do that really simply by just connecting with yourself and connecting with God and tapping into that divine, eternal aspect of reality, because that actually is the reality. We live in a world filled with facade. So learn to tap into the reality, the unseen, and you're going to find bliss. And so live in bliss. Principle number 9, be at peace. When I popped away from the body, when I stepped out of the body, I went from panic and fear and anxiety and stress and worry, because I was like, crap, I'm going to die here. I went from all those heavy emotional feelings, and it flipped instantly into peace. And it was the level of peace I have never experienced. I had never experienced to that degree in my life before. And it was amazing and astounding. And now I have tools. I know how to access that again because it's in here. It's me. I am that peace. I am that stillness. I am that, the unseen aspects of my physical self, the being that animates this physical body. That's where peace is. That's where bliss is. That's where God is. And principle number 9, oftentimes people think that suffering is like this terrible punishment that happens to us. It isn't. It's really just a catalyst for greater levels of understanding of who you actually are and what you're made of. It's pushing you to the outer edges of who you really are. For healing, for transformation, for spiritual awakening, for growth, for spiritual rebirth. And, you know, I think a really, really good way to illustrate that is the story of Job. Job went through horrendous suffering. And I think that he is a type and a foreshadowing of all of us. All of us will go through very hard challenges, what we would call suffering, not because God is mean, not because he's playing a game just to see what's in us. It's because that is the way of rebirth and unfolding. If you go read Job's testimony at the end of his experience, he knew God at the end of all of that. He never would have had that just by reading about God in a book. So those are my 10 principles, my takeaways from my NDE. And I don't believe that a human being has to have an NDE to experience a cracking open or a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, I've never had an ND myself, but I know that my my divorce was probably the it was my hell on earth, but then it was also
Mm-hmm.
where I got to know the Lord. And I found him. When you're in the dark and it's like you're drowning and you're trying to figure out how to stay above water.
Hey, Sarah.
So I was saying that I've never had an NDE myself, but my divorce was my catalyst to really get to know the Lord, because as I was trying to stay above water in the darkest part of my life where it was hell on earth for me, I as I turned to him, as I turned back to Christ over and over and over again, I found beauty. I saw the
Yeah.
beauty in the pain. I saw the gift of growth in my own life and in my own self. And not only that, I saw the beauty of who the Savior is.
Yeah.
And and I think it was a huge catalyst for me to be where I am now, because I've had a couple family members come to me after they've died and they're terrified of the Lord. They're so afraid of him because they've grown up with this idea that he's fire and brimstones and gonna condemn them to hell. And yet he is so full of love. And so it's still hard. I still personally struggle with, oh, why do I have to go through this? And continuing to retrain myself to look at that differently and to look at it as an opportunity and to help it let it refine me and not feel sorry for myself for those struggles. It's a
Yeah.
continued journey, but I it's such a beautiful thing if you're willing to walk that journey and to accept those trials and to keep turning to him.
Mm-hmm.
I know, at least for me, he showed me the beauty of all those struggles
Yeah.
and helped me to see myself as well. I mean,
Yeah.
and it didn't happen immediately for me. I was told by a friend to start asking if I could see myself the way God saw me.
Mm-hmm.
And I faithfully said that prayer humbly, just begging to see myself really for months. I mean, probably 8 months or so, 8 or 10 months. I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
this prayer and I'm not getting an answer. And I'm like, why not? Why can't I see me? I really need to. It was in, the very end of my marriage before we separated. And so it was probably the time where I felt the most rejected, in my life, and felt the most worthless. And I needed to see, I just desired so much to see my worth in God's eyes in that time. And it took a while. But the moment I saw, I what I wanted the moment I finally saw myself was perfect. And so I see that divine orchestration. I used to say he was, during that time of my life, I'm like, he is just the grand chorister. He's just, there's an orchestra going on around us and
Yeah.
all this music. And I got to see that.
Yeah.
And it was such
I've
a beautiful thing when it finally came.
I've had that experience too. And I would have to say, going through all of the challenge and the struggle and the suffering and the cracking open, that's ultimately what that did for me too, was it opened up a way for me to have an intimate, personal relationship with the Lord. I didn't know I had access to that before. And those were questions I was asking for myself as well, was please just show me. Because I'd had that experience where I saw my mother in that way. And I was like, could you please let me witness that part of myself? And he did. He showed me some imagery that was, I think, symbolic for me, but also um, it also reflective of how he sees each and every one of us. And I painted a picture of it. He said, go put this down on paper right now before it leaves your memory, so that you can always remember how I see you. In fact, I'm going to grab this picture, and I feel like this represents each and every one of us. I'm no different. I'm not special, but I think every human deserves to know how God sees each and every one of us. I'm going to grab this picture really quick. Oh, I don't even know if you can see it. I know that there are parts of this picture that are symbolic. Um, I don't know that it's literal. I don't know that we really have wings or anything like that, but uh, I do believe that it was the Lord's way of saying, "Hey, you are cherished, you are seen, you are loved, you are special, you are equivalent, you are my peer and my friend." And so yeah, I has definitely taken me into a place where I've been able to develop that kind of a relationship with the Lord, um, and He's been able to gradually show me too, who I am and who I am to Him.
That's beautiful. And we all have that place in his heart. There was a near death experience I listened to where the person said he that when Christ looked at him, it was like he was the only one who existed. He just loved him with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then he asked him about someone else, maybe, and in his life. And then he said, and he felt how Christ then thought about that person and
Yeah.
loved them completely. It was like they were the only one who existed, and he loved them so completely. And that was really touching to me. I think, as parents, sometimes, at least for me, I remember having this little bit of fear that, will my children get enough love, or will I have enough love to give all these children? I mean, I have 7 now, but this was a few early on.
Yeah.
And but then when you have another child, your heart expands so effortlessly. At least for me, it was like this effortless expansion.
Yeah.
And if it's so easy for me, that in that way I can understand God, because it's effortlessly, the expansion of love that I felt was so effortless. And he is he's not limited to the physical form. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of share that. It's such a beautiful thing to be loved by them, and they do. I mean, I struggle personally with my self-worth, and I know a lot of people do. And I've always struggled with that. And sorry, the song I Can Only Imagine.
Yeah.
And I love that song. And I used to, at that time in my life, I was probably listening to it quite often. And sorry, I'm just trying to think of how much to share. It was very personal, very sacred. I was in tears over my marriage at one point. One day, I mean, I cried many tears over it. And I was just heartbroken. And I fell to my knees, just sobbing, just absolutely distraught. And there I was, feeling alone and broken. And I felt the Savior appear, Jesus. And he stood in front of me and he said, "Sarah, get up. You don't belong down there."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I don't want to. I'm broken. It's like, no, rise. And I felt him put his hands like on my elbows, like lift me gently. And I stood and he just held me and just like kept pouring love into me till I could stand.
I think that's definitely a way that we can discern the Lord in our lives, is that he's constantly inviting you to rise and to stand and to see the divine version of yourself. And you contrast that with what the adversary does. He's constantly putting you down, berating you, making you feel like you're less than, or you're not enough, or you can't do it. So anytime we have thoughts in our minds that we're not enough, or that we can't, or we're not capable, or we're not smart enough, pretty enough, funny enough, whatever enough, you can bank on it that is the voice of Satan. And that is how we can discern, is because Satan's there to tear you down as an individual and tear down your self-esteem and your self-love. And the Lord's always right there on the heels of that, building you up and edifying you. He doesn't condemn you. It's Lucifer that condemns you. So I tell my clients this a lot. When those feelings and those thoughts come into your mind that you are not enough, or that you're not worthy, or you're not something, you know that's not God talking to you, and that's not your higher self talking to you. So now that you know that, you can literally raise your arm to the square and say, no more. Stop. You can tell them to stop. You can say, get behind me, Lucifer, and don't ever talk to me that way again. Because they don't have the right or the authority to bully you that way. So the negative self-talk, that's the adversary every time.
Well, thank you for that. I'd never thought about commanding him to depart and never talk to you like that again. I love that. I remember once I used to have nightmares every single night. I mean, all growing up. And I finally started praying about how to properly pray to get them to go away because praying wasn't enough. Prayers was not making it happen really. And I was still really struggling with those nightmares, and I was told to cast Satan out.
Yeah.
And I and all of those who serve him, not just him. I think there's many who choose that. But my kids started having nightmares, and I always had worried that my children would be afflicted in that way. And one of my kids started having nightmares every night. And I was like casting out every single night. I'm like, this is stressful to have to do this all the time. And I was like, how could I word my prayers better or do this in a more effective way, that this isn't something I have to be doing each day? And what I was told was, well, cast them out, use your words to cast them out longer, like to not return, expand it to just leaving, to no, and to not return, or cast them out forever or something. And it was so like silly. I felt a little dumb, I'm like, oh, of course, that makes perfect sense.
Do you know what happened for me? Because that was really similar to me too, because I was really spiritually sensitive and I was an empath, and I was having a lot of dreams and visions and visitations, and it was mostly dark beings that would come in and torment me all of the time. And as a child, that's pretty scary. But when I got older, like you, I was like, I got tired of having to cast out all the time. And so I started to ask, okay, then if I'm going to see this stuff, would it be okay if I just see the light beings instead of only seeing the dark beings? And that flipped for me. And then I started having visitors who walk in higher levels of light come. And when you start asking for that, and your focal point or your focus goes to that, then that's where you have more of the experience. Because I think that people who have those experiences with the dark beings, it's because they have spiritual sensitivity. And so you can ask, rather than just see all the dark ones all the time, can I see the ones who walk in the light? And it really helps.
That's great. A lovely suggestion. I think that's fantastic.
So if I
And
could share one last thing, and this was
yes,
really
please.
profound for me, and this is what I do when I work with people now, is invite them to do the same thing in their own lives, to take this into their own lives and put it into practice. But towards the end of my 25-year battle with Lyme's disease, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed just sobbing because I just wanted to be whole. I wanted to be healthy. I wanted to be done with this burden. And so symbolically, I saw myself sitting on the bed holding this burden. And the Lord showed up at the foot of my bed and said, "Would you like me to take that for you?" And I noticed, because I was witnessing it from up above, so I was watching myself have an interaction with Christ. And it was curious to me that I didn't say yes. I still kept clinging to this burden, or this, whatever it was, the sickness, the baggage. And I thought to myself, why am I still holding that? And as I asked the question, the answer that came was, it's because you're too afraid of who you are on the other side of it, because you've only ever known yourself carrying this burden around all your life. And so it's unfamiliar to step into, like, who do I have to be? If I let this go, I don't know who I am. And so I had to take this huge leap of faith to go, okay, I don't know who I am without this, but I'm still going to let it go. And I handed it over to him. And in that moment that I handed it over, it was over. And it wasn't like this magical, hey, you're cured, but it was the end of an era of sickness in my life. It was the beginning of the end for me. I mean, I gradually, from that point on, I started getting better and better and better and better, and having more health and less pain and less of all of that stuff. And so I really do think that a lot of the time in our lives, when we're carrying around these heavy burdens, it's like the Lord's just standing there going, hey, would you like me to take that for you? And he will. And the truth is, he already has. He's just waiting for us to let go. So I think that's another key principle to the healing of all of this.
I would agree. And maybe it's just because I need to visually see something, but I just feel like I should share something. Maybe it'll help others, because I've heard that my whole life, give it to the Lord, give it to the Lord.
Yeah.
And never really understood how I was to do that, what that really meant. And so a few years ago, I decided to sit and ponder on specific things that I was hoping he would take for me and was ready to let go of it. And imagined my hands holding it like it was this ball of pain or
Mm-hmm.
sadness or whatever. And actually imagined me lifting it up and him standing there and me offering it to him and asking if he would take it. And that's actually really helped me to understand, because as I imagine that, I feel that feeling of, will you please, like the letting go, like the
Mm-hmm.
getting ready to rest and the
Yeah.
releasing of it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because most of the time he totally takes it. Like, yes, like, hallelujah, feels great. Every once in a while, he'll say, not yet. There's still more to learn before I remove that, like before I take it.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time it's always a yes, and it's so wonderful. And I just wanted to offer that if that would help anyone else to envision that. And I know it really helped me. So
Yeah.
thank you so much. And I imagine that you've talked about these 10 things that you've learned on one of your videos, because I know you've been doing videos for a long time too. If you want to share where people can find you.
Yeah. So my website is Great Life, Greater Impact. fromthedust.com. And I have a YouTube channel over on YouTube called Great Life, Greater Impact. And that's where I do free classes every Tuesday. I also do, after the free classes, I do group healing sessions for people. The subscribers to my website, we get together every Tuesday, an hour after the free class, and we get after doing our inner work so that we can have these amazing spiritual openings and epiphanies and feel lighter and feel better and step into our bliss and step into our power and access the higher self. So that's where they can find me, is those two places, YouTube and Great Life, Greater Impact.
That's awesome. Thank you. I know I've been wanting to sign up, and I hope that people listening will as well.
Yeah.
So I also like to ask a question before my guests leave. And that question is, how would you describe Christ in a few words?
Well, I can only think of one word. And that word is love. And I don't mean to be cliche about it, but he really is the embodiment of love. He's the love that created this world. He's the love that heals our souls. He's the love that we're looking for. And yeah, that's the only word that comes to mind when I think of him, when I connect to him and when I talk to him. It's nothing but pure, absolute, non-limited love.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I would agree. I was thinking the other day how cliche it sounded, but that was it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here, Janet.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I'm going to stop the recording, and
thank you for being here. And don't forget to subscribe. God bless.